Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Is that all, stranger?
So I've had a lot of people ask me to check out this game called Wicked Seed over the last few days, which is an indie survival horror title that just popped up on Steam, developed by Dead Right Games, famously known for their work on Wicked Seed. And it's a game that just boggles the mind because it really shouldn't be as fun to play as it is. I mean, for starters, the story is basic, bordering on forgettable, and it's also very clearly just a Unity Engine asset library flip. There's no cohesion or consistency between any of the monsters, for instance. I mean, you got crabs and giant sharks, but then also Lovecraftian-looking creatures and giant serpents. You're also playing as a young, attractive female, because of course you are, who's suffering from low-grade amnesia brought on by some kind of trauma in her younger years, which is all handled very seriously, only for you to then be able to dress her up like this.
Of course.
The visuals and cinematics are elementary, the cutscenes and animations are stock standard, and I'm almost certain the protagonist is the same character model from another indie horror title called Celine's Unbearable Night.
I think he knows what's happening here.
Even the title seems kind of off too. Yeah, Wicked Seed. Sounds like one of those weird visual novels you see on Steam where everyone keeps hugging each other.
Assholes.
But yet for some reason, I can't stop playing this.
I know what kind of man you are.
And I've already sunk a couple of dozen hours into it over the last couple of days. Well, let's find out why that is, shall we?
Locked and loaded.
The plot is that you're playing as a private investigator named Ella, who's coming to Maine after receiving a message from her brother Jacob. Apparently she hasn't spoken to the guy in years due to something that happened with their family in the past, but for whatever reason, he's asked to meet her at a seaside cabin with information about a shady pharmaceutical company that he works for.
This doesn't look good.
Doesn't go to plan, obviously, and the road's blocked off with debris, forcing Ella to head off into the forest on foot.
I'm gonna need to find a way around this.
With it all feeling very reminiscent of those earlier areas in Alan Wake. And then before too long, Ella's getting attacked by these bizarre-looking monsters as she begins this perpetual quest to find her brother, taking her from the forest and the seaside through to the sewers, the police station and city streets, with this whole weird side task where she has to get insulin for the diabetic daughter of a farmer named Henry.
I'm not expecting charity here.
Yeah, this takes place like a quarter or so into the story, where she randomly passes out during one of the most bizarre cutscenes of all time, only to wake up in the dude's house, in completely different clothes, and then having to go off and help this random guy and his daughter.
Oh, God.
Either way, though, it all ends in a very Resident Evil-inspired mansion that, yeah, of course, sits atop a mysterious laboratory, with her past being connected to something this company's been digging up from the tunnels beneath. It's a combination of combat and exploration combined with the odd puzzle, most of which are pretty well thought out, requiring the player to pay attention to different notes they come across along with observing environmental clues, all the kind of stuff you really need to have a pen and paper handy for. Along with there being a little bit of optional backtracking once you find crucial items, if you want to go back and get extra resources. Classic stuff. Does call itself survival horror on the Steam page, but to be honest, outside of a couple of sequences, it doesn't even ever really seem to try to scare the player. And Ella seems oddly chipper for a person who's under constant attack by all these monsters.
They look like monsters to you?
There is a mini-boss enemy you have to fight in the tunnels underneath the city, which I pretty much noped at as soon as I saw it.
My name is Jeff.
Along with these surreal flashbacks involving Ella back at her home, which are very clearly masking what actually happened.
Guess not. Well, time to chill.
But it's all going to seem very familiar to anyone who's played any survival horror games in, the last couple of decades. With the environments all just having that stock standard Unity Engine feel, as if every surface is somehow shinier than it's supposed to be. The music and the sound design is also often really lacking too. I mean, check out this boss fight, for instance, and how out of place this music sounds. Yeah, I mean, it's not really inciting the feeling of tension or fear as you take on this monstrous opponent, is it? But it still does have a few neat touches here and there, like how when Ella's in different states of injury, how her facial expressions and posture completely changes, and then after running around for a bit, she seems to sweat more.
I said, God help me.
It's definitely one of those indie horror games that wears its influences on its sleeves too. I mean, Ella alone is basically, we've got Claire Redfield at home. You got lockpicks to get through locked doors, there's a very RE4 inspired shooting gallery. One of the unlockable outfits is Ashley Graham, another one is Ada Wong, along with a later one being Jill's getup from RE3. You've also got references to Resident Evil 1, Silent Hill 2, Silent Hill 3.
There's no way I'm putting my hand in there.
And then even a one-off interaction that throws some shade at the whole yellow paint debate. You got manual save points, safe rooms, item boxes, and the game encourages multiple playthroughs,
Not bad at all.
with the player's stats and gear able to be constantly upgraded and improved with each run. You can even find old coins throughout the levels, which can be spent on vending machines for extra items. Then at all the safe rooms you come across, you can pull up a chair and take a break with some hot coffee. Yeah, not to be confused with the infamous San Andreas mode of the same name. With each coffee machine always having one full serving ready to go, which you can either drink at that time or put into an empty takeaway cup, both of which refills all your health and energy. And this also functions a little bit like the campfire mechanic in the Souls games, because if you choose to just rest here instead, it's going to refill your health but also respawn all the enemies in the area. Which I guess is supposed to be in case you need a last ditch heal, but also if you just want to go around and farm enemies for XP. Again, keeping this thing in line with its influences and feeling very Twin Peaksy.
This is, excuse me, a damn fine cup of coffee.
Where this thing differs though is the combat, because compared to the real-time stuff in the various titles this takes influence from, this time it's instead turn-based, more in line with something like Parasite Eve. And I know that that's probably instantly going to turn a whole bunch of people off. I mean, to be honest, it almost turned me off. And I'm sure that some of the footage I'm showing is definitely not going to do the game justice. In fact, if anything, it's probably going to undersell it. But once the whole thing starts to click, it actually becomes really fun and engaging. Now, the majority of the combat here is done with ranged weapons, being mostly pistols and shotguns, with a few assault rifles and an SMG added in as well. With standard ammunition for all of these being unlimited, but then you've got heavy duty rounds which do more damage that are in more limited supply. So what you need to worry about the most here is your energy and stamina, because without stamina you can't attack or really do anything during combat, and then without energy you can't use any of Ella's many combat abilities. Attacking enemies is pretty simple, you just walk up to them and press the action button and then choose what you want to do, as long as you got the stamina. Whether it just be shooting them, throwing grenades, or even using healing items. And it is worth noting too that once you're attacking or carrying out an action, you're more or less just a sitting duck and can't move. So you need to time this stuff properly so you're not just standing there like an idiot giving enemies a free hit. You can't flee from combat either, so once you're in it, and you annoyingly can't cancel out of actions either. You just kind of got to stand there and watch the results play out. Yeah, as terrible as they might often be. Early on in the game, Ella also finds a fire axe, and once you got this thing, you can block incoming attacks, but more importantly, you can start parrying, stunning enemies and leaving them open to counter hits. Parry enough attacks or hit someone enough times and they'll even be staggered, unable to move for a few seconds and then leaving them wide open for a brutal attack. Which is where Ella can whack them with the axe for massive damage. And yeah, thank God this game is smart enough to make you invulnerable while you're doing this, or else it'd be a pretty damn useless feature. Really making this too one of the core features to the combat, and one of the only ways to consistently crowd control, as when something is stunned, it's pretty much locked out of combat until it recovers. Then as Ella levels up from XP points, she starts unlocking new abilities and skills, like being able to quickly craft and throw off these makeshift grenades. All of which require scrap, which is the same resource you've got for upgrading weapons. Kind of making it this trade-off of either using this stuff to help you out of a tough situation, or holding onto it to upgrade your weapons. It's also kind of important to spend a lot of time here making sure you're choosing the correct upgrade. Do you know what I mean? Like, really make sure you're not rushing through things and choose that best possible upgrade you can.
I know what kind of man you are.
Weirdly too, one of the most effective skills early on here is being able to throw a stone at an enemy, which almost always seems to stagger them. Ow! And then the final ability she gets, aptly named Finality, is like some kind of Final Fantasy limit break, where she unleashes all these attacks on a single enemy like it's Cloud Strife dropping down Omnislash. which is also kind of busted because you can just spam this thing on the bosses once it's unlocked and do buttloads of damage completely unchallenged. The catch to all of this though is that there's like a dozen different enemies here to contend with, and not all of these require the same strategy. For instance, there's one enemy type where if you don't kill it first, it's going to get super pissed off seeing all its buddies killed and then go into a rage mode. Another enemy type spawns in a reinforcement after being staggered if you don't kill it before it recovers. And then probably the most annoying of these Cthulhu-looking motherfuckers that can heal the other creatures. Yeah, pretty much always making them the top priority. I mentioned before how like visually inconsistent all of these enemies are, where it really does look like they're from completely different games, but then in a weird way that also kind of helps with identifying what each of them are. You've even got this little journal page that tells you what all their weaknesses are, with there being potential upgrades in there behind mastering this stuff and exploiting it. Stuff like how, you know, one enemy might be armored and tougher from the front, but shoot them from behind and you'll cut right through it. Or how hitting them from a certain angle might disable one of their attacks.
Ugly bastards.
Which is, yeah, again, pretty reminiscent of the combat in something like Parasite Eve, in the way that you can target certain parts of the enemy, and then also how your distance from them is going to factor into the damage. This all ties into a basic stat system too, with things like offense, defense, and agility, with different kinds of armor affecting this even further, and with there being lots of little one-off items you can find for incremental boosts. And then consider that on top of all of this, you got a bunch of weapons which can all be customized and modified with different parameters too. And yeah, on that note, like, I'm sure there's lots of great combinations and builds out there that other people have found, but the one that I ended up going with the most was with one of the shotguns, which had a super high chance to stagger enemies. And I just found that when I put upgrades on it, which also increased the stagger damage, I was pretty much able to stagger even the toughest enemies within a couple of hits. Plus, it also has this really handy benefit of spreading damage to nearby enemies. I did try a few other combinations in there as well, like with some of the assault rifles, and one of the pistols fires super quickly, where I've even seen people saying online that you can load it up with upgrades to make it dish out elemental damage. But I found that doing this pretty much burns through your energy for every hit, energy which I reckon is better spent on using actual combat abilities. So yeah, like honestly, I just couldn't find a better build than what I had with the shotgun. And it got to the point where I just stopped bothering with any of the other weapons and put all of my scrap into upgrading this. I then even had upgrades on my armor that made it so that combat skills didn't use scrap at all, and also that they required half as much energy. Along with another one that made it so a brutal attack didn't stop that stagger timer, letting me just keep wailing on someone even after they'd been knocked down. Starting to see my point here when I said the whole thing's pretty complex? Yeah, well, then to add in yet another layer to what they've already got, they include these thing called feats.
Whoa, slow down, egghead.
Which is like a certain requirement you get randomly for each encounter, like reaching a certain action count or not taking any damage during the fight. Which is then going to give you a random permanent upgrade to one of Ella's stats. Every time.
Fucking monsters.
Fuck. Now for my first playthrough, I chose hard mode, which I thought at first was a mistake, but it ended up being a necessary trial by fire, because once I got the hang of things, from that point on, I was able to breeze through most encounters. I mean, something like the parry system, for instance, would be really easy to overlook or ignore on normal difficulty, but learning this shit is essential on the higher ones. Because later enemies start to get armor ratings, and parrying those attacks is the fastest way to knock the armor off. It's definitely not all perfect though, and it is very dependent on the kind of environment you're in as well. I mean, when you're outside in the open and have lots of breathing room and can see where enemies are coming from, it's usually fine. But during the more cramped and interior areas like the tunnels, the sewers, or the police station, it's kinda fucked, where the camera is often as much your enemy as the actual hostiles. Some of the enemy types also require specific abilities or items to best beat them, and if you haven't got enough energy to use the skill or got the item itself, you're often at a huge disadvantage. The biggest defender there by far are these stupid crab things, which start off the fight inside these eggs that can easily all be wiped out at once with a single flash grenade.
Easy.
But if you don't have the energy for one or don't have one in your inventory, then be prepared to fight a whole lot of them at once, which, yeah, ain't very fun. Yeah, and weirdly too, you pretty much have to start the parry animation with these things before they've even attacked, which is a bit of a weird timing component that took me a bit of time to get used to. In fact, I probably died more to these things alone than any other enemy type in the game combined. And even on my second playthrough, they were a right nuisance. I mean, they pissed me off, man. They pissed me off. Yeah, death by crabs. Now I know how your mum felt. There's also these super annoying acid-spitting turret things you take on quite a bit too. And there's a later variant for these that leaves an acid puddle on the floor, along with exploding when they die for AoE damage. And when you got a few of these things at once to contend with, it's about as fun as pulling out an ingrown toenail with your teeth. What's really annoying too is when an encounter just keeps spawning in new enemies over and over, where sometimes they can spawn in right on top of you and just instantly get off a free hit, which is horse shit.
Bullshit.
So yeah, like I could totally understand if someone played this and just got the shits after an hour or so, because it definitely does feel relentless and unforgiving at times, which it is.
Which it is.
Even when you're doing everything right though, like there are still some fights here and there that just drag on and on, with some of the enemies having an absurd amount of health points. But all you can really do is just repeat the same 2 or 3 tactics over and over, whittling their health down until they finally die. The mini-boss type enemies you fight repeatedly are the best examples here, where they're just these fights that feel like a battle of attrition more than anything else. It's like you're trying to erode down a block of granite by pissing on it. Which is doubly annoying when you're suddenly killed by one of these things, given how fragile Ella is, only to have to do it all over again. If nothing else though, it does seem like the game is aware of this, and it does give you a checkpoint before every single encounter. So if you do die, it just reloads you right back from where the encounter started. The final thing I do want to bitch about here, and yes, I do know I'm bitching, is how I do think the last few areas in the game drag on for way too long. I mean, I think I probably spent longer in the last couple of chapters here than I did on the 4 that preceded it. And I kept making a fresh save slot every half hour or so because it genuinely felt like it was getting towards some kind of final encounter, only for it instead to just be like another boss fight and then just continue on, which happened about 3 or 4 times where it seemed like it was ending only just to keep going on. And then the final area, for instance, still has like 2 or 3 other areas within it, a lot of which is more or less just a boss rush against visually different variants of the same bosses you've already fought before. Even when you get to the final boss, before you can even fight it directly, it spawns in one of every single enemy type in the game. As in, it literally spawns in one of every single enemy type in the game that you need to kill first. And I guarantee that most of the people reviewing this thing on Steam haven't ever gotten this far. In fact, I know they haven't. Because according to the achievements when I beat this, barely 10% of players have even beat the game. In fact, barely half the people who own it even got past the 2nd chapter. I will say though that the more you play it, the faster and quicker this all gets, and once you've finally beaten the game, that's really only the tip of the wicked seed iceberg. I mean, for starters, simply beating the story on any difficulty mode unlocks Despair difficulty, which not only buffs up the amount of health and the damage of enemies, but also moves around key items and even adds in entirely new sequences. Like during the bit in the tunnels, for instance, you now got to return back to that seaside area from earlier for a bunch of new encounters. And it's almost kind of like doing an A and a B run in Resident Evil 2, where it genuinely feels completely unique at times. Then if you manage to beat that, it adds in another modifier where it brings in limited save slots and removes the checkpoints before combat. The good thing about all of this too is that in typical survival horror fashion, it carries over all of your upgrades for your weapons and items across all of these different playthroughs. So yeah, like this thing's gonna absolutely keep you coming back for more. Even with just the sheer amount of weapon challenges and unlockable outfits, is gonna require multiple playthroughs. Not that any of this stuff is necessary or adds in any tactical advantage, just the kind of thing that fellow men of culture like myself have a vested interest in.
Well, gentlemen, I don't think I have to tell you what you just witnessed here.
Getting some of the other achievements in here is also going to be absolutely brutal. Like having to beat the game on the highest difficulty mode without saving once, or beating it without accessing the item box. There's another achievement where you need to beat it without ever swapping out your starting armor or weapons too, which is just fucking mental. Like I said, you do get more powerful with each run though, and in fact, even during my second run on the so-called highest difficulty, I think I only ended up dying about 3 or 4 times, steamrolling through everything that gave me all this grief before.
Yuck.
And I don't know about you, but to me, that's the hallmark of good survival horror games. Getting to the point where the stuff that gave you so much anguish and had you thrown your keyboard out the window now gets to the point of being almost trivial. Going back through those formerly challenging sections and sequences and just blazing through everything, all while you're dressed up in some kind of goofy outfit.
That was rough.
Overall, there's just so much content and value here that you seldom see in these kind of indie horror games. Even just some of the basic quality of life features are impressive for a game of this scale.
I figured you'd say something like that.
Like how there's the option to automatically skip every cutscene. You know what I mean? Like if you're playing through the story for the 5th time and don't want to have to sit through any of that stuff. Towards the end of the story, you get the option to fast travel to any of the previous areas from a safe room in case you want to go back and grab all the stuff you missed. And if you spend all these resources on upgrading a weapon and then suddenly decide that you don't like it, you can disassemble the weapon and get all of your resources back at no cost.
Thank you!
Actively encouraging experimentation and not punishing the player for trying new things. The only thing I don't like is how when you're replaying the game, you don't start off with the axe, which might not sound like a big deal, but the 30 minutes or so it takes before you've got it again can be really crushing without the option to parry your brutal attack. But either way, man, like, I still sunk over 20 hours into this thing over the course of a couple of days, and to be honest, I could easily sink another 20 or so if I had the time. Playing through Wicked Seed and looking back on it now, I also can't help but compare it to Code Violet. Both are indie games made by very small teams, both have a female protagonist, survival horror influences, and both of them let you dress your character up in different outfits. But outside of that, that's about all they share in common. And you can see the huge difference between them in almost every single other aspect. I mean, with one of these, you can see the thought and the effort that's gone into it, and how it's very clearly been made by someone who knows what they're doing. I mean, it might seem a bit soulless and like a bit of a blatant asset flip, but it's an asset flip done properly, where it seems that with every intention, they've tried to make it feel like its own thing, resulting in a highly addictive and enjoyable experience. The other one is Code Violet. Overall, I think if you're able to pick up what Wicked Seed is putting down, well, there's a lot of fun to be had here. And it does prove that indie devs can still make decent survival horror titles when they need to. Plus, it's only $30 dues. So yeah, damn good stuff.